Thank you for listening to the Distinguished Physical Education Podcast. As many of you know, not too long ago there was big news in the PE world, the announcement of the return of the presidential fitness test, and PE teachers from across the country took to social media to share their reactions. As I scrolled through the responses, it struck me that for a lot of folks, the reaction had less to do with the test itself and more to do with who was bringing it back. Like so many topics we cover on this podcast, whether it's classroom management strategies, standards-based objectives, or assessment, this one deserves more space than a social media comment can provide if we want to truly understand its nuance. I was fortunate enough to be connected to two passionate physical educators who, while they disagree on the value of the presidential fitness test, both care deeply about students and the reputation of our discipline. Kathy Harvey received a Bachelor of Science in Health and Education from Slippery Rock University in Pennsylvania and taught pre-K through 8th grade physical education for over 30 years in the Bethlehem Township School District located in Asbury, New Jersey. In her retirement, she continues to substitute teach and coach middle school sports. Thousands of students have gone through her physical education program, completing either the Presidential Fitness Test or Fitnessgram, or both. Jamie Sparks is the Agile Product Manager for HealthSmart at Educational Training Research and currently serves as Executive Director of Kentucky SHAPE. He is the former Coordinated School Health Director for the Kentucky Department of Education and a recent past president of SHAPE America, bringing both state and national leadership experience to his work of championing skills-based health education, quality physical education, and healthier school environments for all students. In this episode, we talk about the test's return, whether or not it belongs in a high-quality PE program, and the impact it can have on students. Then we zoom out a bit and explore fitness testing more broadly, what teachers actually do with the data, and what it looks like to meaningfully incorporate fitness testing into a program, if that's the route you've chosen, or had chosen for you. It was truly a pleasure to sit down with two people who care this much about physical education and students, and who speak with this much honesty and passion. And now I bring you Kathy Harvey and Jamie Sparks. Kathy, welcome to the Distinguished PE Podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And Jamie, I would like to welcome you as well. Thanks for taking the time to have this conversation on the presidential fitness test.
Absolutely, Gary. I appreciate the opportunity and appreciate the work that you do with distinguished physical education.
Thank you so much. So today's conversation is meant to explore both perspectives of the presidential fitness test. Kathy, you're going to be telling us some reasons why you're for the implementation of the test. And Jamie, you're going to be sharing some reasons why you think it might not be what most students need at this particular time. You're here to advocate for your perspective, of course. I'm also hoping that we can take the opportunity to learn from each other as well. So with that said, let's just keep our conversation grounded in our work as educators and, of course, keeping front of mind what's best for students. Critics of the presidential fitness test argue that it caused embarrassment and it discouraged some kids, while supporters say that it sets a national standard and it might even motivate some students. Kathy, what does the presidential fitness test represent to you as a PE teacher? And from your perspective, what's the strongest case for your side?
I would say what it represents is a level of achievement for students that sometimes don't shine in other areas. I've seen through my 30 plus years of teaching that there are some students that athletics, sports, fitness is what they shine at. Just like we test people in the classroom and there's awards that they hand out every month for, the social studies award or the high math award. When we come to the end of the year in the President's Physical Fitness Test and we hand out those awards and certificates and the patches that I used to get would have the year 1, 2, 3, 4, and going through school, some of them would get 8 patches and they would be so very proud of themselves. And the other thing, we would always do the national level as well and get a certificate for that 50 percentile, not just the 85th percentile. I would agree that testing, unless it's done in good taste with some privacy and some reporting just to the teacher, or the teacher takes down the stats, really would help to alleviate that humiliation. I do also like that in the president's physical fitness test, if there's a larger person, sometimes it's hard for them to do the flexed arm hang. And so they allow them to do the push up test as well. Just like in math, not everyone is going to score at the 85th percentile. And I think that this gives a place for those kids to shine.
Thanks for sharing that, Kathy. You talked about how some students might really relish this opportunity to prove how athletic they are. You even mentioned some modifications that might be able to be made for students to take the test. So if you can't do the flexed arm hang, for example, you might be able to perform a different aspect of the test. Jamie, what about your perspective? What is your strongest case for why the presidential fitness test is not what's best for students?
I think when it comes to quality health and physical education, I think we run into the same challenges in my work in my own state with the Kentucky Department of Education or even trainings that I've done around the country. Everyone has the same expectation that there's more standards than there's instructional time. So when it comes time to decide what do we teach and what do we fit in with the limited amount of instructional time, I just don't see fitness testing being one of those things that comes to the top. A number of years ago, I was involved in some of the work with the President's Youth Fitness Program when we tried to evolve away from some of the older practices. But even then, and here's my number one thing for PE teachers to reflect on. I was in a room of 30 people at the national conference, and we were there for pre-conference for fitness testing. And I asked the people in that room, how many of you, as leading professionals that were hand selected to lead this initiative back in your states, how many of you to this day, as professionals in physical education, know what your 1 mile run time is? How many of you know how many sit ups you can do in a minute? And not a single person in the room raised their hand. So if we as professionals don't do this by leading by example, what role does it play in our curriculum? And I think that's where the conversation around quality PE have evolved over the last few years is that lifetime wellness. What are the things that we as adults do to self-assess our fitness level? And when we teach students those things, those are the skills and the types of inclusive things that allow all students to participate and find their path forward.
So, Jamie, you made the case that fitness testing takes away from instructional time, that PE teachers have enough standards that they want to cover and teach their students, and already not enough time. Another argument that we'll hear often against fitness testing is how it makes students feel, especially those who might not be the most athletic in class.
We actually have a very concrete example of this. A few years ago, I think it was around the time I was on the national board for Shape America, there was an article in the Atlantic, PE so bad, kids are skipping school because of it. Now, a lot in our field got really angry at that article and said they're unfairly criticizing PE and PE practices. But I think what I saw, and I still use this in my presentations and keynotes today, is the amount of adults that came out and spoke about their experiences. They took to Twitter, they took to Instagram, and the essence of that article and how PE made them feel was something that stuck with them to this day. And even more so, the thing I like to point out from an advocacy standpoint, when we've had poor experiences in physical education, these are now principals and superintendents and elected officials. And so when we go and advocate for PE and more physical education and more opportunity, these people that had these poor experiences, and I think fitness testing could have a place. If PE was like math and reading and we got it every single day all year long, then absolutely fitness testing belongs in that equation. But that's not the situation we have in any place.
We're going to zoom out in just a moment and talk a little bit more about fitness testing in general and what its place in physical education could be. But Kathy, I'd love to hear what your response to that might be. So, how can you implement fitness testing, whether that be the presidential fitness test or otherwise, and still ensure that students feel welcomed in physical education and that they don't have the types of experiences that Jamie mentioned that would then impact the reputation of physical education down the line?
I would have to say that where I taught, we're very privileged that our school district is small. We have maybe 3 or 4 sections of 20 students in a class. And that's what we get into the gym, 20 students. So to have them have privacy, some are playing four square on the other side, others may be shooting basketballs while I'm doing the flexed arm hang. and I just, call the person's name and they come over. And no one's really paying attention to that because they're too busy doing their other things. When we do such tests as push ups, they're concentrated with their partner and they get to buddy up with someone, their friends that, is not going to hopefully make fun of them. As far as Jamie was saying, also, that my teaching partner and I always did the tests as well. And we posted ours up on a chart so that the kids could see that we buy into it and that as physical educators, that health and wellness is a part of our lives and is always a part of our lives.
It sounds like, Kathy, that you provide students with a safe environment in which to engage in the fitness test. So they don't have to worry about ridicule or feeling embarrassed in front of their peers. You have maybe different stations set up. Students might be working with a partner. They might just be working with you or a co-teacher. But it's not like all students in the gym are doing the push-up test at the same time. And when a student can only do 3 or 4 push-ups, everyone else in the class knows about that. So you've kind of solved for that issue, right?
That's correct. And again, it's whoever is leading the class in whatever school district. You have to make sure that you're assessing with the proper criteria. And that's why we tend to do very small groups. Even with the push-up test, I don't have 10 kids doing it with their partner watching. We may have 4 or 5 so we can make sure that they're doing those 90-degree push-ups. I have peers that just go ahead and let the kids measure one another, and you can't do that. You have to be that person that cares about the test and does it properly. And again, we're fortunate that, in New Jersey, it's a requirement of 150 minutes a week. So in the elementary, we would have 3, 4 times actually of 40 minutes. And in the middle school in my district, they would have PE every day for 42 minutes. So as far as, using at instructional time for the test, we did have that comfort of having a bumper there.
What I'm finding most interesting, Kathy, is the nuance that you're describing. When we think so often these days about who's for something or who's against something, we think that everyone in those camps agrees with each other. But what you're saying is that you might be for fitness testing, but you have an equitable way that you do it for students where you protect their privacy and you make sure that they still feel welcomed in that space and that it's not something that's going to be embarrassing for them. Jamie, the presidential fitness test was removed back in 2013. What impact do you think that that had on students?
Well, first of all, the President's Council and the history of that has always been at the federal level. And so at the end of the day, it's what states require and state standards. So the reality is we have had states that have passed fitness testing requirements and mandates. The other side of that equation that got really interesting not long after PYFP and the evolution of that was the conversation that really got pushed across the nation around teacher effectiveness and teacher evaluation. And then that's where we saw this issue really come back to light a lot, is because when it came to assessment and data, that was one of the areas that teachers could grab data from. However, I think Shape America and other organizations that put out some cautionary guidance around reminding that fitness testing should never be used for student scores, and then additionally not to use it for teacher effectiveness evaluation because there's a lot of really loose research and data. I think some of that even points to the number one predictor from pre and post test of students in fitness testing is they simply got older. It doesn't matter how good the PE program is, it doesn't matter how good your PE teaching is. The student is simply 9 months older from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And so, if you're going to say this is how I want to be evaluated as an educator, you can see the complexities of why that's not going to be an authentic assessment into showing student growth, which was really what the effectiveness evaluation movement was all around. So, the PYFP was an attempt to take a step back away from the standardized version of fitness and to make it more holistic, to make it more about self-assessment. I think there were still problems with PYFP, but I think it was a step better than where we had been on this issue.
So, students should be assessed throughout the year on their progress towards physical education standards, their ability to articulate some of those standards, and maybe not so much on their physical progress towards some of these metrics.
Absolutely. I think it's easy to also understand that what genetics plays into the ability to perform on these tests. Again, I think from a student perspective, We want lifelong learners. We want movers and learners for life. I appreciate Kathy sharing her program. And I think what she's doing there was an awesome work, an awesome job. The reality is that's not reflective of physical education across the country. Some of our programs have 60 to 80 kids per class. And so the complexities of running quality PE, let alone trying to do fitness testing. And then when you look at a 9-week class or a 12-week class, and more often than not, I think those are what I see and hear are the norms at the middle school level, or 2 to 3 times a week at best at the elementary, some one time a week. And so all of a sudden, when you take 6 or 7 different tests and you're trying to administer to 50, 60 students, you're easily going to take up for pre-test 30 to 40% of your instructional time. And then you get Christmas break, and then you're only got a few months of instruction before you're supposed to do post-test. So when these things have been implemented, I think these are the unintended consequences we talk about.
So I think Jamie is absolutely correct. When there are larger populations in a classroom, how do you do it with the privacy and so forth, and taking that time away? If you only have a 9-week session, that's different than having 180 days with kids. So I really understand that. And again, that's probably more of part of our profession, that not everyone gets the requirement of physical activity and movement and health for that matter in their school system.
Kathy, with the schools across the country either starting to implement the presidential fitness test or considering it, what do you think will be gained by adding it back into PE programs?
I believe the attainment again of those kids, that's all they have, the shining star. Besides them, I also see the shift. I did a 3-month gig at a school for someone that was on paternity leave in the spring this year, and I had been out of the classroom for several years. I came in and I was like shocked at how overweight, unmotivated, and just really lackluster for at least 50% of the class. And we're dealing with fourth, fifth, and sixth graders who still should love to move. So they do the Fitnessgram tests there, and they complain, about the Pacers. I guess everyone does. And when I went into that school and I brought in my own set of warm ups, none of them could do more than one push up. And I think that it's the instructor's fault, the teacher's fault in that respect, but the kids had no idea that push-ups were important. I did planks with my kids there because I think core strength, that's the basis of it all. We started out with 10 seconds and many of them couldn't make it. So with the bringing back of the physical fitness test, it gives them parameters that are more stringent than the fitness gram. As an example, a first grader only has to do 2 push-ups in order to be in the healthy zone if you're a boy. In the president's physical fitness test, you have to do 6. And I think if they are instructed, whether it's through a game where they're, passing cones back and forth or balls or swishing pennies or whatever it is that you use to increase a shoulder strength, then the kids will see that, oh, yes, I can do this. And I am not just healthy zone, I am better than that because when honestly, when this first came out where we had to do Fitnessgram, my teaching partner and I went and we looked at the parameters and went, oh, this is just so sad because that is so far below where my school was. And again, I hear Janie, you got 70, 80, 90 kids in a classroom. And sometimes they're not even taught by, physical educators. It's the classroom teacher. But in our school of like 400 kids, I would think we only had like 1 or 2 that were overweight and not obese because it was such a good program between the PE and the testing and giving them the feedback and finding out what those things that were lacking through the testing. We could see, was it shoulder strength? Was it flexibility? And we built so much of our lessons around that to help these kids improve.
You're talking a lot about how fitness testing can be used as a motivational tool for students. Jamie, do you see it that way, or do you want to offer a different perspective?
I think from my perspective and working with what I think today's quality physical education should look like when it comes to what we'd say would be modern fitness assessment, I think we have to put the focus on growth, not labels. things like tracking your own goals, heart rate monitors, fitness portfolios, activities where students are showing and doing their level of progress. And I think that reflects what we as professionals do as well. I remember early in my teaching career, I used to use this analogy for my kids because I wanted them to feel successful. I wanted them to feel safe. And before I really started to understand some of the complexities and unintended consequences, I would remind them, think about an Olympic gymnast versus a football player versus a marathon runner. They're going to do these same tests and they're all going to perform differently. And so that was kind of setting the tone for my kids to say, it's okay when we do self assessment, but also that self assessment. I think there's more holistic ways beyond a fitness test to get there a lot quicker with lessons that are going to be across the lifetime. I think building that confidence and building lifelong habits, I think there's a better way from a policy perspective to ensure those outcomes.
Kathy, I want to go back to you for a second. Not all students are going to be motivated by fitness testing. Maybe there is a cohort of students who are going to feel motivated to increase their score to meet like a national standard or a guideline. What about the students who aren't motivated by that type of testing? How do you solve for that in your program?
Well, I think there again, you take the results of what the pre-test was and you look at that and say, let's design activities that just incorporate these improvements that will organically happen as the year goes on. And I do get the point of they're 9 months older, but there are times where you can do it in a shorter period, like that paternity leave that I took. I was only there for 3 months and I saw great strides in what those kids could do.
I really appreciate how you talk about connecting the activities that you do in your instructional time with students to the fitness test. What I saw in some of the years that I was teaching, I had a couple of teaching partners, this was at the middle school level, who would do jump rope tests 4 times a year, once a quarter. And the kids would do as many jump ropes as they could in 60 seconds. And guess when the next time they took the jump ropes out was? The next time that they were testing, right? Yeah. So in my mind, that's what sticks with me. Sometimes when people just bring up fitness testing, it's not that there are through lines, that there are connections that are being made between components of the test and then the activities and the concepts and the standards that you're teaching students. So I really do appreciate those connections. Since you mentioned data, let's talk a little bit about what teachers might want to do with that data. Supporters of fitness testing say that it can provide useful benchmarks and that teachers can use that data to adjust their instruction. Those that oppose it oftentimes just feel like it's a number that doesn't really support student learning. So, Jamie, can fitness test results be used meaningfully in a high quality PE program? And do you think that's actually happening in most schools?
I think the potential is there. I wouldn't argue that. But I think in the real world, that's where the complications really come in. I would start with the accuracy of the data. We're pretty atrocious in this country at providing content specific professional development to our teachers now. So expecting them to administer a fitness test to fidelity across multiple populations of students with all the other challenges we've already mentioned. So I'm going to say, how accurate is that data and how valid and reliable is it? I think that's the first issue. And then could we use that data to inform other growth measures or things within the curriculum? Again, if we had daily PE across the country, then we're talking about something different. But I think most people just have collections of data and we know students are unhealthy. And then there's not really, we don't have enough instructional time to do anything about what we know currently. So I don't think fitness test is going to move that bar for where we know we need to be related to youth health and fitness. And let's also clarify this executive order for the president's is focused, and here comes the childhood obesity issue back up. This is not new. We've had a lot of legislatures and politicians for years that have turned a blind eye to the data that we've seen is a trend that we've seen for almost 3 decades. Do I think that fitness testing is going to change that trend? Absolutely not. Fitness and physical education are one small component of a lot of other things that need to happen in order to solve that issue.
All right, Kathy, I'd love to hear you respond to two things then. Based on what you've said so far, it doesn't seem like you were the type of teacher who just collected fitness data and had file cabinets full of papers and numbers of how many push-ups and sit-ups students could do. So how did you meaningfully use that data? And then just to follow up on what Jamie closed out with, do you see fitness testing having a role in childhood obesity?
So the first question with the collection of the data, we would use that to then implement it during our warm up or exercises part of our class. Right now, I think the trend is to have walk and talk for 2 minutes as the kids come in. And that's, you take attendance while they're walking and talking. I'm old school. I like to put them in their squads. We do kind of make things a little bit more modern where there's a list of exercises that they can choose from, and again, with 4 to 5 times a week, they hit pretty much all of those exercises. So if we see that someone's lacking in the sit and reach or the back saver sit and reach or the V sit, we then have that on the list and they do that so that every day they're getting a chance to add more flexibility. And with each component of the test and the muscle groups that it works, we do that and try to implement that in the warm up program. In games, we do that as well.
What are your thoughts on the influence or the impact that fitness testing has on childhood obesity?
Just as Jamie said, there's a lot that goes into it more than just PE class for one. I do have to say that I like what Kennedy is doing, taking all the artificial things out and making our kids' diets better. I look at the school lunches that are served and it's just garbage. It's all fat. I was horrified when I saw the lady, she had all the French fries out. She took a big can of vegetable oil and sprayed it all over everything. And I'm like, oh, geez, our lunches weren't like that back in the day. I have seen a decline in participation in sports out in New Jersey since the COVID era. Many of the high schools that have up to 2,000 students, they don't even have enough for a freshman level basketball, soccer, field hockey, whatever it happens to be, where there used to be tryouts. I just think there's a lackluster with the children, and the screen is always there. And I think that very much leads to the obesity and the parent just saying, well, you know what? We're going to get the fast food tonight. I think that's a big contributor to the obesity. So, physical fitness testing impact that? Probably very little, unless the parents are cognizant of looking at those scores and saying, "Oh, yeah, I'm not doing a real good job here."
Kathy, I'm going to stick with you for a moment and move into practical implementation now. So, you've already shared a little bit about how you used to implement the test and give students privacy, et cetera. There's going to be some teachers out there who are going to start implementing presidential fitness test or other types of fitness testing. Have you thought about what successful implementation would actually look like these days? And just as important, what kinds of support would schools and teachers need in order to implement a test like the presidential fitness test with integrity?
I think in a small class situation, you can add those privacy barriers. You could put a mat up so when they're doing the flexed arm hang, you go behind the mat. Pick partners so that they're small group again. So my teaching partner, she would stay in the gym and I would take 4 kids out into the hall and they would do their push up test or sit up test. I just think you have to really look at that because in this day and age, there are many children that are not fit, that are not even close to being fit. And they know it. The bigger classes, I feel badly for those teachers and those kids. I do.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably take that even a step further in that groups of 30 and 40 are one thing, but when you're talking about groups of 60 and 70, like I've heard from some teachers that I've spoken to, I mean, I think it's going to be just that much more challenging to implement any type of high quality PE program, never mind fitness testing. Jamie, if the presidential fitness test is not the right tool, then what do you think should be used in its place? A different type of testing, no fitness testing at all? What might like a modern and inclusive version of some of these fitness tests look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the cool thing about the day and age we live in is PE was been innovative for a while. My friend Beth Kirkpatrick was a pioneer in heart rate monitoring, and now we look at all the different options that we have with heart rate monitors and different organizations and companies that provide those. I remember the first set of heart rate monitors I got do a grant and implemented 15 years ago. It was the latest greatest thing. Where today, for today's students, between wearables and iPhones and smartwatches and all these different things. Like these things are very accessible to students in their everyday life. So the evolution of that in a short amount of time has come a long, long way. Personal goal tracking. I think individualizing those assessments. I'm just now myself getting back to running. I have no idea my age, what my time is supposed to be, but I know what it was yesterday and I know what it was last week. And that's the exact things I want my students to learn, regardless of somebody else setting that criteria and standard. I've referenced earlier fitness portfolios. I think there's holistic ways to do cross curricular integrations within the context of health and PE. And I think that's something that can be much more school based focused in bringing those real life things in, and also the community connections you get from something like that. Getting students to know all the different ways in their family and their community they can connect to their own health and wellness, and advocate for their health and wellness and that of others as well. And then I think the more we can put choice-based assessments, I think for any teacher in any content area, but especially in physical education.
Okay, so rather than a program like the Presidential Fitness Test, you would advocate for increased instructional time that focuses on PE standards, for personal goal tracking for students, and then the skills that go along with that so that students understand what it's like to set a goal and then to make progress on that goal. Kathy, I want to go to you for a moment on the personal goal tracking part. It's something that I've been kind of wrestling with over the past couple of weeks since this news came out. In some, maybe most content areas, actually, I'm thinking of like literacy and math, students are compared to a national score. But when we think about physical education, we often hear personal goal tracking, and you should try to beat your own personal best. What are your thoughts on students being compared to a national score in physical education versus what Jamie's advocating for, and that so many teachers advocate for, which is just continuing to improve on your personal best and to modify your workout program in order to be able to do that?
I believe that the students, and remember, we're talking a large age span here from 5 years old all the way up through 18. And their motivations are different and their comprehension is different on goal tracking. Little kids, they'll track themselves how many laps they do around something and they'll love it. Oh yeah, I beat myself one more time. The kids are, that are 18 that are walking around the track because that's what they need to do for their fitness component, they don't really care. I think that personal goals are important and that to base it against the national standard, I think has some correct points, especially in the lower grades, because that's where we need to say, you need to be fit for life. With the advent of dropping a lot of the sports themed in physical education, going to the lifetime and fitness, I think that's where we're going to see a decrease in the obesity, and they have to be responsible for themselves. Even as 6, 7 year olds, they can be responsible for what they choose to eat, how they choose to play, and they don't understand about pushing and setting a goal like that.
So being able to compare where they're at currently with a national standard might give them that motivation to want to continue to improve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be 85%, doesn't have to be 50%. It can be, this is their baseline and let's where we get to here. But as a national standard, if you're 7 years old and you're a girl, then you are in this area.
I actually want to push back on that question just a little bit and point out the question was framed in, well, these other subject areas do it this way, so we should do it that way. But what you actually pointed out was the number one reason teachers are burnt out and continue to leave the profession. It's because we do standardized tests and we say that every X% of our students have to be at proficiency. And our system fails to recognize when a kindergarten teacher brings little Johnny from this level of reading to that level of reading over the course. That's what real authentic assessment looks like. But real authentic assessment is hard to show in a newspaper on a test score. And so No Child Left Behind has impacted education in this country like no other. And not only No Child Left Behind, 10 years ago, we did away with No Child Left Behind and we called it the Every Student Succeeds Act. States were supposed to create their own systems that were more holistic. But this is so entrenched in our way of measuring schools and education that we didn't move very far past it, even with ESSA. I always say it this way. If we treated doctors and dentists like we do teachers, we wouldn't have doctors and dentists left. If we held doctors and dentists accountable for how many heart attacks they had to treat or cavities they had to fill, but that is exactly the educational system. We point fingers, and that is the number one source of burnout in education, is because we don't look at what is stacked against the school, right? A dentist would say it's unfair for you to judge how many cavities because I can't control all the things that people do outside of my office. Welcome to education. There's a lot of things we can't control in a school building about the students we have, but yet we're supposed to get X number of percent to proficient, or then we're labeled. And I think that's some of the conversations that I've had in my career, not only in health and PE, but with my friends in arts and humanities and music. They want to do real authentic assessments as well. They want to stay away from anything that's standardized, because the real teaching and learning comes from the authentic assessment.
After hearing each other's perspectives today, is there anything that makes you see the other side differently, or at least appreciate where they're coming from? Kathy, I already mentioned that I had a bias of what I thought fitness testing would look like, and I appreciate how you made it a little bit more nuanced with the privacy of student testing and making connections throughout your unit. So that's not something that I had been currently thinking of when people bring up the term fitness testing. So I'll lead with that and say that that's something that I appreciated you brought up. Kathy, anything that Jamie said that you can appreciate where he's coming from?
Oh, Jamie said a lot of things that I can appreciate. Seriously, again, I'm privileged to have worked in a small district, and I read on all, I'm on many PE things on Facebook, and read that I have 90 students today and we're stuck in the gym because it's too hot outside. What can we do? That just blows my mind that that should even be allowed. I mean, would you put that with a classroom teacher with 90 kids and movement? So his point of view makes a lot of sense to me. So for fitness testing in that aspect, I would have to say I wouldn't spend the time on it either. My college roommate, she had 30 minutes each class once a week in North Carolina. And she never did units because you couldn't do units. There's no continuity. So to spend 4 days on fitness testing is ridiculous. And that's where our profession looks at that more as someone's prep than really doing well by these kids. When that changes, and it's has in New Jersey, then we'll see some really valid results on how these kids can be better fit. And, Jamie also said implementing with the health lessons as well. I think that's a really important component, that we not just test them and say, okay, this is where you are, but let's take that back to the health and say, how can we make this better for you or the whole group?
So it sounds like you advocate for maybe something that we could call situational fitness testing. It doesn't have to be a hard line or a hard rule. If you only see your kids 30 minutes a week and you have groups of 40 or 45, fitness testing might not fit into that program, or it might look completely different than some of the scenarios that you were presented with in your teaching career, where it might be 20 or 25 students and you see them every day or every other day. Jamie, what's something that you appreciate based on what Kathy said?
I always appreciate getting to know teachers that have been in the trenches, that have done the good work, that have represented quality PE. And she's taken a lot of those things into consideration. She obviously had a really solid program, thought about a lot of the unintended consequences, and was trying to safeguard for her students. And I think at the end of the day, I think that's the number one thing that we have to do, regardless of what programs we're implementing, is thinking about that impact and how we do it to fidelity. So I appreciate that insight. And I would have a lot less concerns if we had more teachers that had that kind of professional development training and background. But unfortunately, as we've talked about in this podcast, that's one of the biggest challenges we have, because if we want to do this, there's ways it can work and the ways it can fit in appropriately, but it's going to take a real meaningful, precise parameters in order to do that from a whole scale policy perspective.
Like I mentioned earlier, when I think of fitness testing, I think of old school, like 1980s fitness testing. Everyone in the gym doing the same thing at the same time, or long lines waiting for the flexed arm hang. And what Kathy has kind of opened my eyes up to is that fitness testing can look different. If it fits your program and you feel like it could benefit your students, there are different ways to implement it with compassion and providing inclusive experiences for students. Is that the way that you viewed fitness testing as well? Because I heard you say that, if all teachers kind of saw it the way Kathy saw it, we might not be so adamant against it.
Yeah, to a certain extent, I think my perspective is just a little different, just because I have worked on the state level, and so I've seen people do great things in places. I've worked with a lot of researchers at the higher ed level that they've come up with some great things to be implemented, but is it scalable? And so that's the real question: is when we talk about policies and practices, what is truly scalable? And I think that's where the challenges come in with any initiative or any curriculum or any kind of implementation.
Let's try out this little scenario that I created and we'll see what we can come up with because I really do want the teachers who are listening to be able to walk away with answers to what might pop up in their schools. So let's imagine that you have a new principal at your school, and that principal is getting a lot of pressure from parents and school board members regarding the implementation of the presidential fitness test. The principal asks the two of you, so you're co-teaching, to help them make an informed decision. So you each have different views on this topic. Kathy, you might be excited to bring the presidential fitness test back, thinking that's going to motivate students and restore like a sense of tradition. And Jamie, you might be a little bit concerned about equity or the relevance to student learning and PE standards, among other things. Here's the challenge. The principal wants a unified recommendation. How might we come to a shared decision?
What is our population for class?
Let's say that it's something somewhat common. So let's say like we're at middle school, the classes are 35 students, and you get to see your kids every other day. I think that's a relatively common middle school experience. What if we changed it slightly so that it wasn't that the two of you had to be on the same page about it? Because I realize that could be difficult. How would you, if you were the only PE teacher there, how would you respond to your principal? Your principal is saying, hey, look, there are these other stakeholders that want to know what's going on with the presidential fitness test. They want you to implement it. I need to know if that's like the best thing for students. What would you tell your boss?
Well, I'm a big believer. I was there in the trainings when we really started doing the national initiatives around the comprehensive school physical activity programs. I want the PE teacher to be the champion and be the leader. And so I think the first thing we would say as a department is, even with every other day, we still don't have enough time to teach everything we want to. So we really got to look at our school environment and our community environment and say, what are the things that can extend beyond the PE walls? So what are the ways that we can infuse movement, we can infuse exercise at other places, and that's before school, during school, after school. That's also looking at our community partners. How can our hospital, how can our public health entities, how can our fitness gyms and clubs, how can we bring our community together to really promote health and wellness so that it's not just happening in the four walls of our gymnasium?
Kathy, any thoughts?
I know we have done this with other components of our curriculum or added curriculum. It might be a time where I would, because I, again, love those kids that have like, I want to do my best. I want to get out there. I want to earn that award. I would probably say if someone wants to come in during recess time, if you would like to try that President's Physical Fitness Award, we can do that. I would give my time for that. And I know in my school where I was, there would be a lot of takers on that. And that way it gives those kids that want to shine, and those kids that aren't really that motivated. It's not a test that they have to take that they would feel humiliated by. They can still participate in the regular PE curriculum that we're doing. And as Jamie said, bring in other parts into the school. I mean, like they have the fun runs and things of that sort. So I would say it would have to be like an extracurricular or time during the day.
Kathy, when you say students come in during recess, do you mean that this fitness testing would be taking place outside of PE instructional time and that some students could opt into it and that others, if they weren't motivated by it, they wouldn't have to?
Yeah.
Jamie, what does that do for your view of fitness testing if it's something optional that students could opt into?
Oh yeah, I think it's completely applicable for students that are interested in that. So I think that's a good way to think about it. And then I think we were talking about the holistic school stuff. I think back to I referenced heart rate monitors earlier, but pedometers were a big push. You don't see pedometers anymore because pedometers are built in, and you have a lot of people that track their movement through their phone every day, and your phone will give you a reminder you were less active or more active. And so these are real world applications to our fitness and our assessments. And so making those connections with students, and then you get staff buy-in, and that's a really important part of really furthering your program.
Look at us setting an example for folks who maybe had slightly different opinions and having a meaningful and productive conversation. This has been a really thoughtful exchange. I think it shows how passionate PE teachers are about giving students meaningful and motivating experiences in physical education. And I just wanted to thank both of you for sharing your perspectives. My hope is that listeners will walk away thinking about how we can take the best parts of both sides, whether that's implementing fitness testing or maybe deciding not to, as they determine their own path forward. So, Kathy and Jamie, I just want to thank you again for your time and sharing all of your expertise with the folks who listen.
Well, thank you, Gary, and thank you, Jamie.
Thank you both and enjoyed the conversation.